Israel wanted to occupy Gaza, it would be occupying Gaza right now.
None of them will.
It clearly doesn't want to be occupying Gaza.
Yeah, none of them will do that.
Why, Shank, according to you, why is Israel not currently occupying Gaza if they want it so badly?
Because they're waiting for America to give them permission. They were waiting for this election. That's why they supported Trump. So Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were terrible on this issue. They gave Israel everything they wanted, but Netanyahu made a deal with Trump, and that became obvious to me that the reason for that was just Trump was going to give them even more, which is just to let them grab this land in Gaza, which is going to cause a massive conflict. And guess who's going to pay for it? We're all going to pay for it.
Okay, let me bring in...
come on, you know the donors control things. The drug companies are deeply unpopular, and they win every time in Congress.
All right, let me bring in...
they buy our Congress, and so does Israel.
Made the point. Let me bring in Dave Smith. Dave, the immediate big picture here is that there's been, a big fracturing of the agreement in terms of releasing hostages, Hamas, and so on. And it's now coming to a head on Saturday, where Trump says if they don't release all of the hostages by Saturday, midday, I think he said, then all hell will break loose.
All right, y'alls, welcome back. It's about to get real. Dean Cain might be wearing that objective mask, but don't be fooled what you're gonna hear from him. This isn't a guy who's down the middle. He's straight up playing the game in ways that make you question his true allegiance. When the heat turns up, do you really think he'll hold the line? Or will he make shady deals, quietly defending the very double standards he pretends to oppose? One thing's for sure though, as tensions out there rise, Dean's moves will be anything but transparent. Watch closely, because the man's about to show you exactly who's pulling his strings. Whether you like it or not, it's gonna get ugly.
Supposed to be 3 hostages being released. Netanyahu now no longer says 3, but doesn't give an actual number. He just says many, I think. So you've got 3 different positions here. Either way, it feels like a very precarious moment in this process. What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly agree. It's a precarious moment. There was a good piece in the New York Times about this. I mean, where even some Israeli officials were admitting that they haven't held up their end of the ceasefire either. There's been a bunch of Palestinians killed during this ceasefire. The problem here, I think, with Trump's negotiating posture is that, again, it's just all the pressure is he's just trying to put more pressure on Hamas and on Gaza. But there's 2 parties here. And I think at the very least, people could acknowledge that, like, there has to be some pressure on both of them. And this is one, I just want to respond to a couple of the things Batya was saying, because there actually was really interesting news that broke on your show here, Piers. If you remember back a few weeks ago when you hosted a debate between Wesley Clark and Scott Horton.
Yeah.
And 4-star General Wesley Clark, who's probably most famous for his 7 countries in 5 years comment that he had seen that this plan was all. He revealed very casually on your show that actually he had seen these plans back in 1991. And you know where they came from? They came from Paul Wolfowitz. And he said this was sanctioned by Israel, that Israel under George H.W. Bush's administration had the plan to topple all of these governments. This is a decade before 9/11. And then, of course, they lost the election. The plan got reignited when George W. Bush took over. But to Badia's point, there was no groundswelling of support from the American people to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi or to start a civil war in Syria or even to overthrow Saddam Hussein. This was totally a top-down move, largely done by Israeli influence. And so it's just not the case that what's popular is always going to rise to the top and that politics and business have no influence on this. And I'm not a lefty. I'm not I don't care about getting money out of politics. I care about getting politics out of money. I want to see the size and scope of the government drastically reduced so it doesn't even really matter who owns the thing. And I think Elon and Trump are doing a great job on that front, or at least starting to. But, this is just the idea of what we're going to look at. Piers, the thing that's kind of frustrating here, right, is that I sit here on your show 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and I say, you're never going to be able to get rid of Hamas. You're just going to get more Hamas or Hamas-like groups doing this.
Yeah.
And then we turn around, and then all the pro-Israel, people, they just act like that point never happened, and we just move on to whatever the next topic is. But what are you guys going to do? Start bombing the rubble? I mean, for God's sakes, have a little bit of humanity. The numbers. Look, Donald Trump, by the way, I think Cenk is wrong when he's floating at. Remember all those months where on this show people would always argue whether you can trust the Ministry of Health's numbers or not? That argument's over. It's way higher than what they were estimating. Donald Trump the other day said there's 1.9 million people in Gaza. Okay, that's 400,000 shy of what we started with. I'm not claiming to know what the exact numbers are, but this is just so, I mean, like on any level, this is biblical levels of evil. You're just going to start bombing these people again and think that's going to solve the problem?
Yeah, Dean, I mean, look, I think these are very valid questions. I've been saying for many months, what's the plan for the end of this? Because it seemed to me there was no actual evidence that the ideology was being removed whatsoever. In fact, quite the opposite. It looked like support for Hamas was growing in Gaza because of the scale of the retribution from Israel for October the 7th. Dean, I mean, my question for you would be, just on a human level, if you were suddenly told, along with your entire neighborhood, right, you've all got to leave, right, and you can't come back, instinctively, on a human level, you'd be like, sorry, what? No, this is my home. I'm not going anywhere. And even if
if they told me that, if they told me that in a sort of a blank slate, but if people had done what happened on October 7th and then you get removed from that area, I don't know how much you can complain. And when they're pushing that,
but why should 2 million people be punished for the actions of 50,000 people in Hamas?
Well, what is the percent of support for Hamas within the Gaza Strip?
Well, it's hard to gauge what it really is, because rather like in Russia and other places, when you have a controlling body in a country who rule by fear and violence and intimidation and murder, then often people are not going to be honest in polling, right? So we don't really know. Well, I mean, I've seen enough scenes to think that there's a lot of support, but I think to collectively punish 2 million people, which is what is going on here under this plan, that seems to me to be almost the embodiment of ethnic cleansing, isn't it? I mean, if you're forcing them against their will to leave their homes and not allow them back, that is, by the definition of the phrase, ethnic cleansing.
Well, it's not a genocide and it's not ethnic cleansing. There are plenty of Arab Jews or non-Jews inside of Israel. It's Hamas. It's that. Yeah,
but they're there voluntarily. Hang on. They're there voluntarily. The point about ethnic cleansing is where a group of people are removed from a place where they live against their wishes. That is called ethnic cleansing.
It's called the consequences of a war, and a war that was started by Hamas on October 7th, period. You do that, let me tell you what, Piers, anybody on this panel, if your kid was among those that were taken hostage and pulled across, what would you do to get him back? I would do anything.
Yeah, but I would read. Yeah, but Dean, I agree with you.
Right. Okay,
Dean, I agree with you. But what would you do?
Why don't we ever apply that to the other side?
Well, that's about to say.
I get your point.
It makes sense. I agree with you there.
I would do anything. But what about the Palestinian children who have died in such greater number, who have been so much more oppressed?
But quit putting rockets and things in schools. Quit putting. I mean, there's no question what Hamas is doing by burying all their things right in the schoolyards, right in the churches, right in the mosques, wherever it is in areas. They do that, and then what do? How do you respond to that? At a certain point in time,
have you seen the pictures? Have you seen the pictures of Gaza? Are you telling me there were Hamas missiles in every single one of those buildings? That's the entirety of the story? Is that Israel just had to blow up this building, which, by the way, still I don't think would be morally justified. But like, come on, man. Look, like, it's just, again, even to Dean's point, I always find this fascinating because somehow Americans could say this about the people in Hamas and go like, like you said, yeah, I wouldn't like to be kicked out of my neighborhood, but if my government had done October 7th, I'd accept it. Your government, Dean, destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, the drone bombing campaign in Pakistan. So like, can you get kicked out of your house now? Is it not ethnic cleansing if we were to kick you out of your neighborhood? This is so ridiculous that we impose these standards on these poor people that we would never dream of holding ourselves to that standard. It logically makes absolutely no sense. And it doesn't really matter what Hamas's approval rating is, in the same way that it doesn't matter that George W. Bush had record high approval ratings. That doesn't mean that the innocent civilians of the United States of America are fair game, and neither should any other group of civilians be.
Okay, Batty, your response.
Can I just jump in for a second? I feel a little bit like, Dave, I appreciate what you're saying, but I feel a little bit like you're trying to have it both ways. On the one hand, you're saying, Hamas as an ideology will never be defeated, ergo there is this sort of widespread support for it. On the other hand, you're asking Israel to live side by side and treat the population of Gaza as innocent. Now, I happen to agree with the latter. I think I don't understand why everybody keeps saying that they're so popular. The latest polling have shown Hamas support is down to 20%. I've even seen polls at 7% because the people of Gaza, the innocent people of Gaza, understand who brought this upon them. Hamas is much more popular right now in the West Bank than it is in Gaza because people in the West Bank have not had to, well, a little bit, they've had to bear the costs of what happened on October 7th, but mostly it's been the people in Gaza. And I think that to ignore the historic unpopularity of Hamas is truly criminal. It's to suggest that we cannot imagine a life for the Palestinians in Gaza, in their homeland, not living under the brutal regime of Hamas. Hamas is only able to attack Israel in a very limited way. October 7th was not some act of unbelievable genius. They broke a goddamn fence because Israel wasn't looking at the fence, right? It was like the most easy, obvious, stupid thing, right? When actually, right now, Hamas's ability to actually kill Israelis is going to be back to what it was before October 7th, which is very, very minimal. This is not like an unbelievably sophisticated group here. And what I don't understand is why do we think it is compassion to the Palestinians to sentence them to live under a brutal dictatorship that murders and tortures and steals food from its own people. And I'm not saying that we should have some sort of, plan here for regime change or whatnot, but I'm saying that there seems to be this weird view that the primary victims of Hamas are Israelis, and they are not. They are the people of Gaza. And again, Piers, I don't think the question is one of ethnic cleansing because Trump, you're right, Dave. He did say they can't go back, but he also then very quickly said they're not going to want to. He is picturing a situation in which young Gazans are given an opportunity to leave and seek a life elsewhere, an option, a choice, which they have not been given ever before. And the question is, should they be given that choice or should they be subsidized by the international community to continue living under the brutal regime of terrorist dictators?
All right, but hang on. Look, there's a lot to unpack there, but the immediate problem is none of the Arab states want to do this. So this plan is not going to go anywhere because none of them are prepared to take in 2 million Palestinian refugees, least of all Jordan.
People always say that when Trump starts a negotiation. No one's going to do this. Look at what he achieved, Piers, over the last 3 weeks with tariffs. He got everything he wanted every single time.
But hang on.
Can I respond?
There's a very big difference between tariffs and 2 million refugees.
Yeah.
Dave.
Listen, the idea to even make the comparison of Mexico or Canada sending 10,000 troops to their border and compare that to Jordan or Egypt taking in 1 million refugees each is just, they view this as an existential threat to their regime, and there's lots of historical reasons for that. But there's just no comparison between getting that concession and getting this one.
All right, folks, let's close this off. Piers dons a referee striped shirt. It's clear that Dean Cain and Batya aren't here to call fair plays. They're busy waving the pro-Israeli flag and conveniently sidelining voices like Cenk and Dave, who jumped in to expose the real double standards at work. The narrative spun by Dean and Batya paints Israel's pause on occupying Gaza as simple wait for Washington's blessing, all while glossing over the intricate power plays and backroom deals that define this conflict. It's like watching a magician's trick where the sleight of hand hides a fair, more complex agenda. Selective outrage where the brutality of Hamas is condemned with fervor. Yet, when it comes to Israel's own controversial tactics, the rules seem to change faster than a political script on a deadline. Cenk and Dave, on the other hand, aren't in the game to play partisan cheerleaders. They're here to highlight the absurdity of a debate that's all theatrical and no balance. They remind us that while Dean's camps celebrates deals and narratives that conveniently ignore the broader human cost, the real measures of accountability isn't about who gets to call the shots, but about challenging those double standards that let political expediency trump genuine justice. In a high-stakes geopolitical chess match, the true referee should be transparency and accountability, qualities that seem to vanish faster than a politician's promise once the cameras stop rolling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, y'alls, and I hope to catch you on tomorrow's show. Ciao for now.